They'll briefly discuss their comments for this afternoon's closing session, and then we'll have a short period for question and answer for them. For the question and answer period, if you could stand to the microphone and clearly say your name and the media outlet you're from, we'll have a few minutes left at the end there. So I will turn this over to my esteemed colleague, who everyone knows sitting next to me, who has the best sartorial style of anyone I know. Professor Sharon Lewin is Director of the Infectious Diseases Unit at the Alfred Hospital, Professor of Medicine at Monash University.
I start by saying, as a local co-chair, we're absolutely delighted with the conference we've had over 13. Obviously it started with a very difficult beginning with the news of MH17, but in many ways I feel that has united the HIV community even more with a sort of renewed sense of how important the work we're doing is currently. We've heard lots around prevention, new moves in pre-exposure prophylaxis, new ways of delivering PrEP, but there's a lot of operational issues in understanding again the epidemic and how best to implement prevention strategies.
Thank you, Professor Lewin. I next have the pleasure of introducing who I will now call the world's mayor, who has really raised the bar on local government participation in the conference. Lord Mayor Robert Doyle has been in his current office since November 2008. He was previously member for Malvern in the Legislative Assembly of Victoria from 1992 to 2006, and leader of the Victorian opposition from 2002 to 2006, representing the Liberal Party of Australia. The Lord Mayor will briefly reflect on what the legacy of AIDS 2014 is for Melbourne.
Thank you, Owen. First, for me, some of the scientific and research announcements, as Sharon has alluded to, very exciting for the future of treatment. Secondly, the other point that Sharon made about elimination of stigma, and not just the legacy statement, but also the Melbourne Declaration. I'm very proud of that Melbourne Declaration, carrying the name of our city and the slogan that nobody should be left behind. And that's particularly important for our city. You might not know it as you go around, but we come from 200 different nations. We speak more than 220 different languages and dialects. We practice more than 120 different faiths. But we are one Melbourne, and that's very important to us. So that's the second part. The third part, and I'll tell you a little story I'm going to tell at the closing ceremony as well. As a city, we have tried to say this is not just another conference. This is something that we embrace as a city, and it's something that we participate in as a city. Legacy as well as during the time of the conference. And that's important to us. So we wrapped around 150 cultural events around the conference itself to add to the experience of the delegates. I hope to indelibly stamp Melbourne on their memories, but also to make it very special, to say this is not just about talking in a lecture theatre. This is about engaging the whole city. For all mayors who host this conference, and certainly the Mayor of Durban needs to pick this up, all mayors. Not just one day, all mayors. One reason why is because as you go about and you meet different people and you have different meetings and you're giving different speeches, people do say to you, why the red socks? And it's given me a chance all week to a much wider audience to talk about AIDS 2014.
Our next speaker is John Manwaring. John has been living with HIV since 2006 and talking about it ever since. There have been an array of events and sessions on stigma and discrimination at this week's conference, and John is going to speak to those briefly.
Thanks. I don't know necessarily as articulated the last two speakers, but I do want to acknowledge just how remarkable the city Melbourne is, not just for the conference, but just in a general sense for people living with HIV. It's maybe not a slogan you want to use promoting the city, but it is Colorado originally, and coming here, I've never seen... I didn't know it was possible to see such a coordinated, concerted effort to have positive people supported and represented and taken care of. The fact that medication is available widely without a copay, things like that, simple things, but it means a lot to me as a new permanent resident of Australia, so glad to be here. When we live in Western societies, Northern societies, however you want to put that, we have a tendency to forget just how fortunate we are. And I can say not a moment goes by that I don't realize how privileged I am. To have some certain, unfortunately, but inbuilt advantages. The fact that I'm a white male is an advantage, and I'm seeing that here, and it's heartbreaking in a way, because it seems like these are rights, and it's just a basic treatment of people that should be afforded to everybody. And so it's been discouraging but also heartening to see the way that people across the world have responded to this, especially in environments that are far worse than here. As Sharon mentioned, Russia, Uganda, Nigeria, even India for that matter. So it's been encouraging to see that, and I think I'll address that a bit better in my speech this afternoon. But I think coming out of it, the key thing I would like to see is, well, something that's been around since longer than I've been around. I'm from, again, Colorado, but 3 months before I was born, we had the Denver Principles come out, and this was, if you're not familiar with them, basically Nothing About Us Without Us, or GIPA, the greater involvement of people with AIDS, or meaningful involvement of people with AIDS, MIPA, the other one. I'd like to see that renewed. It needs to be understood that people living with HIV are not victims, we're not sufferers anymore. We are living full and wonderful lives, and we are active and willing participants in fighting this battle.
Our next speaker is someone that if you don't know her by now, you're not paying attention. So, Professor Françoise Barré-Sinoussi is Director of Regulation of Retroviral Infectious Unit at the Institut Pasteur in Paris, the current president of the International AIDS Society for a few more hours, and therefore my boss for a few more hours, and the International Conference Chair for AIDS 2014. Françoise, please.
Thank you, when only a few hours for you to suffer. It has been, I think, a great conference. As you know, we started this conference in very deep sadness. After the tragedy, with the loss of colleagues and friends, I found out that finally what we have been going through and showed to me that it's a lot of respect among our communities for all of us. I mean, and when one of us disappears, everybody is concerned. So for me it has been a conference showing once again how much the community is really united for the same cause, of course, for the fight against HIV/AIDS, but beyond. And my feeling really at that conference is that it's probably the first time that we are opening the field of HIV/AIDS to others, through that which is able to cure people infected by hepatitis C. A lot of discussion. The feeling that the HIV community is now ready to fight for access, universal access to HCV treatment, as the community has done and still doing for universal access to the treatment for HIV. This is certainly a new movement for me of the community that I'm sure will continue in Durban in 2016. Also to see very basic scientists coming to me after visiting the Global Village and saying to me, now I understand what you are saying when you are speaking about the HIV/AIDS community, and that makes me to think differently as a basic scientist. That's where we are at the AIDS conference, to make everybody to understand better and to remember for who they are working.
Françoise, as I said, I have the pleasure of introducing my new boss and a longtime hero of mine, a person who really epitomizes what the conference is about, bringing together science and human rights as part of one agenda. So Dr. Chris Beyer is Professor of Epidemiology, International Health, and Health Behavior and Society at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health in Baltimore, Maryland. He serves as Director of Johns Hopkins Training Program in HIV Epidemiology and Prevention Science, and is Founding Director of the Center for Public Health and Human Rights. He is the President-elect of the International AIDS Society and will take the presidency at the conclusion of the conference today. Chris.
Thank you Thank you so much, Owen. Good afternoon, everyone. I too want to express my deep thanks to the City of Melbourne, to our hosts, to Sharon and Francoise, who are really extraordinary co-chairs. Conference coordinating committee I have ever sat on, and that committee was also the incubator of the Melbourne 2014 Declaration. And I think the Declaration played a very critical role in saying to the world, what is the story of the Melbourne AIDS Conference? And to really be an example that at this point in history, we need more than ever. So I think the whole movement is grateful to Melbourne, grateful to Australia, and we really hope that the Melbourne Declaration is going to be a living document that is going to continue to inform our responses. To me, I'll just very briefly talk about some reflections on the conference, and then turn our attention looking forward to Durban in 2016. What I've heard consistently from friends and colleagues is that this is the conference more than anywhere else before where the separations, the silos between scientists, clinicians, providers, people living with HIV, community activists truly went away. We really had unity, as Francoise and Sharon have said, an incredible commitment, shared commitment to purpose. I think certainly as we dealt with the tragedy of MH17 and began to grapple with it as a community, there was an extraordinary sense of pulling together and of a recommitment of efforts in all of our various disciplines and engagements around HIV, and it really has been powerful. And I want to add the media to that. We had to, of course, do a lot of media. There was a lot of media attention. People were respectful, your questions were thoughtful and informed, and I'm really not just saying that. As an American, I expected it to be much more challenging. I have an enormous effort ahead of us. We think that coming back to Durban after what will be 16 years since the last conference in Africa is really a historical opportunity to close that treatment gap, to renew the world's commitment to full access. And the great news from science, many of it presented at this conference, that we really now are understanding is that treatment is also prevention. So closing that treatment gap and getting the remaining people living with HIV access to treatment and care and safety and dignity and in ways that support their human rights also prevents new infections and really is the light at the end of the tunnel. And colleague, Dr. Olive Shosana. And Olive, I have to share with you, will be the first woman from Africa ever to chair an International AIDS Conference. That's an applause line, if you want to. It's probably too late in coming, but nevertheless, we got it.
Great, thanks, Chris. So I'm going to turn the floor now to Olive Shosana. Olive is an absolute powerhouse in the response to HIV in South Africa. Someone who, no matter where you go in South Africa and look at how the country has responded to the epidemic, you see her handprint very firmly. So Olive Shosana is the Chief Executive Officer of the South African Human Sciences Research Council. Dr. Shosana is a public health professional and brings to her task a wealth of research, management, and policy development experience. Her vast local and international experience has been instrumental in her expansive career spanning over 30 years. Olive.
Thanks very much. Good afternoon. As Chris said, it will be 16 years since the Durban AIDS Conference was held by the International AIDS Society. And some of you might remember that at that conference, there were still major debates about whether HIV causes AIDS. That's what the debate was. There was another major debate as to whether should Africans actually get antiretroviral therapy or should they just continue to prevent and not get treatment because people were concerned that drugs brought to Africa may round trip to Europe and therefore reduce the cost and the prices of drugs. Those were the debates that were going on at the time. There was also a debate as to whether should we provide nevirapine to reduce mother-to-child transmission. It was so wonderful when Mr. Mandela came at the end of the conference to close it, to to begin to say we are going to address HIV in reality. We are going to make sure that people in South Africa get treatment. And everyone was very excited. And that changed the course of HIV management in Africa. It did, and since then, we've seen a lot of progress. We've seen, as Chris has indicated, access to antiretrovirals therapy increasing dramatically in Africa. In fact, if you look at the figures, you'll see that we've got about 9 million people that have been saved, 9 million lives that have been saved in sub-Saharan Africa as a result of provision of antiretroviral therapy. We must end the discrimination against sex workers. We must end the discrimination against people who take drugs for recreational purposes. We should, because if we don't do that, I don't think we're going to be able to manage this epidemic. We mustn't treat people that have special needs as separate people. We must treat them as ordinary people. They are human beings, like all of us. They just have preferences that certain people decide not to agree with. And this is what we're going to work hard towards as we plan our conference in South Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Olive, and thank you, everyone, for your comments. We have a few minutes for questions. If you just want to come to a microphone, and then we'll just say your name and your media outlet. Thank you.